The broadcast begins with the anchor's voice steady, professional, and deliberate, setting the tone for an evening program designed not only to inform, but also to probe beneath the surface of headlines. The anchor looks directly into the camera, aware that the clip of Donald Trump and Melania aboard Marine One has already circulated widely across networks, social platforms, and political blogs. "Good evening," the anchor begins, letting the words stretch slightly for gravity. A tense and curious moment involving former President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump has been making headlines since video surfaced of the two aboard Marine One. In the footage, Trump appears animated, leaning toward Melania and jabbing his finger in her direction, while she shakes her head in what some interpret as disagreement or dismissal. Almost immediately, speculation ignited. Was this an argument between the couple, or a window into something far larger, perhaps connected to Trump's frustrations with the United Nations after a week he himself described as plagued by sabotage? The anchor pauses for effect, then continues in a tone that bridges curiosity with authority. To help us understand not only what the footage might show, but also how such moments are perceived within the broader political machinery, I'm joined tonight by a source who has worked within the Department of Justice during multiple administrations and has deep insight into how these kinds of incidents are processed behind closed doors. We'll refer to them simply as a DOJ insider for the purposes of this conversation. Thank you for joining us. On the other side of the exchange, the insider's voice comes in calm but measured, someone clearly used to speaking carefully. "Thank you for having me," the insider says. And let me start by noting that when we analyze something like this, a moment that's been caught on tape, widely shared, and open to multiple interpretations, we have to remember the difference between surface perception and institutional concern. What the public sees is finger-pointing and head-shaking. What officials in the Justice Department or even within the White House staff worry about is whether such gestures might signal stress, whether that stress connects to security lapses, or whether it influences political strategy moving forward. The anchor nods and leans in slightly, taking the conversation deeper. That's a fascinating distinction. So, let's talk about the clip itself first. You've seen the footage. The former president leaning forward, his finger extended, Melania shaking her head in response. To the average viewer, it looks like a spat between husband and wife. What did you see? The insider takes a deliberate breath as though weighing the words carefully. Well, I saw what many others saw. An animated discussion. But here's the important piece. These are two individuals who have been under relentless public scrutiny for years. They've been filmed at airports, on campaign trails, in motorcades, on stages. A gesture like finger-pointing, which in a domestic setting might read as hostile, in a political or security context could also be a forceful emphasis. The key here is what surrounded that gesture. The timing of the escalator incident at the United Nations, the president's own words about sabotage, and the stress of international appearances. That context changes how those inside government interpret what's happening. They don't necessarily see a marital fight. They see a man reacting to what he perceives as institutional failure or, in his framing, deliberate sabotage. The anchor interjects gently, providing narrative guidance for the audience. So you're saying that the finger-pointing may not have been directed at Melania in the way it looks, but could instead have been part of an impassioned explanation, a kind of, "Can you believe this happened?" rather than, "You're at fault." Exactly, the insider replies, nodding. And that's why lip readers were brought into the conversation almost immediately after the footage began circulating. People wanted to know, what did he actually say? And the interpretations have been fascinating, ranging from him accusing someone of negligence. "How can you do that?" to him expressing a kind of protective anger. "I can't forgive them. They tried to hurt you." Both of those interpretations point back to the escalator malfunction at the UN, when Melania herself stumbled slightly. That incident was already embarrassing and alarming in Trump's eyes. So, the footage inside Marine One may very well capture his ongoing outrage about that event, not a personal attack on his wife. The anchor tilts their head, voice inquisitive. This raises an important question then. Inside the DOJ or similar institutions, how seriously are such outbursts taken? I imagine that for most Americans this looks like gossip, a finger-wagging spat between husband and wife. But when you're in government, watching a former president, how do you categorize this kind of behavior? The insider's response comes slowly, each word deliberate. That's where the difference lies. For the general public, it's spectacle. For insiders, it's about stability and perception. If a leader is visibly rattled, whether by a malfunction, by what they perceive as sabotage, or by anything else, that becomes part of the calculation about how they'll react in larger, more consequential moments. Remember, this isn't just about a private relationship. When cameras capture Trump visibly agitated, pointing his finger, it raises questions about how he might handle an actual crisis, whether domestic or international. That's why people inside agencies pay close attention, even if the footage seems trivial at first glance. The anchor leans back slightly, allowing that explanation to land. So, in a sense, every gesture becomes symbolic. A shorthand for leadership, composure, or lack thereof. And when you combine that with Trump's ongoing narrative of sabotage, the escalator, the teleprompter, the supposed triple mishaps, you start to see how this could snowball into something larger than just a domestic moment. The insider agrees, adding more depth. Precisely. And to be clear, Trump has always thrived on dramatizing incidents that others might chalk up to technical glitches. He frames them as intentional attacks. So when you look at this Marine One footage through that lens, it makes sense. He wasn't just upset at an escalator. He was building a case that forces were actively working against him. Melania's headshake might have been disagreement, or it might have been her way of saying, "Don't fixate on this." Either way, what the cameras caught was the performance of stress and frustration, and that becomes part of his political story. The anchor, sensing that the insider has opened a window into how institutions perceive what the public treats as spectacle, presses forward with another carefully framed question. "You mentioned the escalator incident at the United Nations," the anchor says, gesturing slightly with a hand to emphasize the transition. For many viewers, that detail may not seem like much, a mechanical failure, an awkward moment. But in the context of Trump's narrative, you're suggesting it looms far larger. Can you take us inside that? Why would a stalled escalator become the seed of such an impassioned exchange on Marine One? The insider leans forward, voice lowering slightly as though moving from analysis into storytelling. It's important to remember who Donald Trump is and how he has always framed his experiences. Long before politics, he was a businessman and entertainer who thrived on turning small inconveniences into spectacles. An escalator malfunction at the United Nations may seem insignificant to an outsider, but to him, particularly because Melania stumbled, it becomes symbolic. It's not just the escalator failed. In his framing, it's, "They let my wife stumble. They embarrassed us. Maybe even endangered us." That framing transforms a glitch into a narrative of sabotage. The anchor nods slowly, allowing the audience to digest the contrast between perception and framing. So, the anchor follows up, in Trump's worldview, technical mishaps aren't just accidents. They're attacks, evidence of a hostile environment. That's right, the insider responds without hesitation. And once that narrative takes hold, it colors every subsequent interpretation. Inside Marine One, when he points his finger and leans forward, you're not just seeing a husband talking to his wife. You're seeing a political figure reinforcing his own story about persecution. And here's the thing. Institutions like the DOJ don't dismiss that as delusion. They see it as politically potent, because if he frames himself as constantly sabotaged, constantly targeted, that becomes ammunition in his public battles. It strengthens his posture as a fighter, even if the incident in question is just a faulty escalator. The anchor interjects with a tone of curiosity rather than challenge. That raises an interesting point. From the outside, many might think, this is just an embarrassing moment, hardly worthy of analysis. But you're saying officials actually pay attention to the way Trump weaponizes mishaps? The insider nods. Absolutely. Because perception is power. Think of how often Trump has turned what others would dismiss into rallying cries. Whether it's media coverage he doesn't like, procedural delays in Congress, or security hiccups at events, he consistently rebrands inconveniences as proof of a broader conspiracy against him. So when DOJ staff, or White House aides during his presidency, saw him upset over something like this, they weren't laughing it off. They were asking, how will he use this? How will this shape his next speech, his next post on Truth Social, his next attack on the establishment?